Hi, this is Eric. It's March 15th, 2025. March 15th, if you know your Shakespeare, there's a saying from the play Julius Caesar, Beware the Ides of March, because something bad happened to Julius Caesar. It was the wrong day for him to go to the Senate, but that's another story. So, what I want to talk about today is Kursk. And some of you have probably heard about it. A lot of people are talking about it, and it's got significant implications. But it's actually, I want to talk about it in its historical context and why it is really so important. So, what I want to say is that, first of all, Kursk has tremendous historical significance for Russian people. It is obviously part of the Russian Federation, and it turns out that in 1934 there was a the biggest tank battle in history took place there. Um, Backing up a little bit, the German armies and their allies, which included Bulgaria, Romania, Italy, Finland, Hungary. There were a number of countries that just by strange coincidence happen to be NATO members. Um, but that has nothing to do with it, I suppose. Even though these countries, most of them, are either rabidly anti-Russian, Russophobic, or in the case of Hungary, where they say, well, maybe we shouldn't be so Russophobic, and the rest of the EU and NATO are saying, you're going to be Russophobic no matter what you think. So this is the democracy of the EU. But in any case, so here we are in 2025, and the NATO has broken all the treaties and rules that it had made agreements with the Russian Federation, starting off with the agreement that NATO would not expand east of Germany. In fact, the original documents were that there wouldn't be any NATO troops in eastern Germany, which had been a separate country. It was the German Democratic Republic. That was it was found. It was a Soviet satellite, so to speak. It had a communist government, and that fell, and then it was subsumed into West Germany. And to this day, it's been kind of what can I say? It's never fully integrated really into West Germany. And in fact, if you look at the latest electoral maps, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, did extremely well in the Eastern Germany part of Germany. So there's still some friction going on there between West and East Germany. But in any case, the NATO, there was an agreement that NATO would not expand, and yet it has expanded. It's in Romania, and it's in Poland, and it's in the Baltic countries, which were even part of the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union is saying, you guys broke your rules. You're staging a very provocative military exercises. It kind of looks like you're planning to invade us, like we've been invaded before, and we're just not going to allow that. They've been very explicit about it. In 2007, at the Munich Securities Conference, President Putin, said to these Western leaders, we can see what you're doing. You're really trying to undermine us, and eventually you're going to try and take control of us and steal our resources, balkanize us. And the fact of the matter is that during the 1990s, they very nearly succeeded in destroying the Russian Federation and balkanizing it. They destroyed its economy, and several million people died. The life expectancy dropped by 5 years. So Russia's very sensitive to all this. And then in 2014, there was a coup that was orchestrated by the United States. There's no question about it. Joe Biden gave the attaboy to Victoria Nuland, who had planned this whole thing with Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the ambassador to Ukraine. It was just there's a guy named George Friedman who was he's like the CEO of an organization called Stratfor, which does private intelligence. They're kind of like a subcontractor for the CIA. And he said this was the most blatant coup in history. So for those of you who think that whatever happened with this regime change and how Zelensky got into power, just know that this is a country that has no sovereignty because it is controlled by the West through a coup that took place in 2014, and immediately starting attacking those people who opposed the coup, partly because who wants your democratically elected government to be overthrown, and also because most of these people who did oppose the coup were are people who speak Russian as their mother tongue. They're Russian Orthodox primarily, and their culture and their language is under direct attack, not just by laws, but by bombs. They were actually getting bombed, which was the whole reason for the civil war that took place starting in 2014. There were two agreements when the Ukrainian coup government was on the verge of defeat. It was called the Minsk agreements, Minsk One and Minsk Two. Those agreements were systematically disregarded by the Ukraine government with the encouragement of Germany and France, who openly admitted that they had no intention of keeping Ukraine together, although in a federated state, which would have allowed these Russian-speaking areas to keep their have some control over their own culture and their own language. So that is the basis of this war. And in 2022, after 8 years of continuous shelling of cities, in 2015 I was in the city of Sevastopol in Crimea, and I was staying at a guest house, and there was a couple there, a mother, a father, and their child, and they were refugees from Donetsk because their house had been bombed by the Ukraine government that had taken over in a coup. So, for those of you who think that this war just started in 2022, you just don't have your facts right. I mean, I know personally, as a witness, I met these people. I met a soldier who told me that she saw a coup coming in late December, in December 2013. A military armory had been raided, and somehow, and all the weapons were taken from it. She said, she knew there was a coup coming, and as soon as the coup happened, she came back to Sevastopol to defend her own city. So this is what you really, really, really need to know. Now, moving forward here in 2022, Russia invaded to prevent an incipient attack by the heavily armed Ukrainian army that had been armed by the United States and England and France and so on. Trump himself, who says, he got along great with Putin, Trump says all kinds of things, but the fact of the matter is he was supplying lethal weapons to Ukraine, which even Obama was hesitant to do. So Trump's hands are hardly clean in this whole mess. In any case, 2022 happens. The war breaks out in even more intensity, and in 2000, and it keeps going on and on. There's some back and forth, but basically the lines have been relatively stable for about a year, and people think that it's a stalemate. But the Russians have been slowly grinding down the Ukrainian army with far fewer casualties on the Russian side than on the Ukrainian side. So here we are in 2025, and in 2024, in order to create some kind of strategic advantage, the Ukraine government, almost certainly with the planning and support of the British, invaded an area of the Russian Federation called Kursk. It's a region of the Russian Federation called Kursk. There's a town there, there's a nuclear power plant there, and the idea was that they were going to move in with a major force and take control of that area, and then use that as a bargaining chip in order to bargain. And they were basically going to say, if you let us, if we vacate Kursk, then you're going to vacate Donetsk and Donbass. and that way they thought that they would keep, that is the Ukrainian, the Kiev government thought that it would be able to bargain with the Russians, but it hasn't worked out for them because the Russians, it appears that what happened, this is my opinion, and probably someone like Andrei Martyanov, who has been writing about this for years. He's a Soviet-born and trained military guy who, after the Soviet Union fell, came to the United States, and he's been living here for, I don't know, probably maybe close to 30 years. He's a U.S. citizen. And basically, what happened was the Russian Federation realized that the West was gunning for it, and after unilaterally disarming, when the Soviet Union voluntarily disbanded, the Russian Federation said, we're going to have to develop new weapons. We're going to have to develop our military industrial complex to be able to build a lot of weapons fast. And that's what they did over the previous roughly 20 years. So when this 2022, what is called a special military operation, occurred, the West thought that they were going to be able to defeat the Russian Federation easily. They called it, a gas station masquerading as a country. They really underestimated what was going on in the Russian Federation at that time, probably by design. Russia did not make it all clear what they were planning. They were basically, it looks to me like they were preparing for this for many years. So the Ukrainian government has been struggling to keep the Russians at bay. They attack this area called Kursk. Some German military officers were caught saying, "This is great. The Russians beat us, the Soviets beat us in the Battle of Kursk in 1943, and now we're going to get our revenge." So that's the backdrop of this kind of thing. So what I've done in the notes to my video is I've attached a couple of videos. These are documentaries. These documentaries, the first one is about Stalingrad, and it's narrated by Burt Lancaster, who's a famous actor, famous Hollywood actor, and he talked about how Stalingrad was probably the biggest battle in world history, where you had millions of soldiers, both German and other countries, fighting against the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union eventually defeated the German army. And what happened was the German army was basically right in the center of Stalingrad, and yet secretly the Soviets planned a counterattack to encircle the German and Allied armies. And once they got them in this encirclement, they were grinding them down, cut off their supplies. And the general at the time, who was in charge of the whole operation, the German general, was named General von Paulus. And they were getting ground down. It's the middle of winter. It's like December or January. The weather is extremely cold, well below zero, whether you think in centigrade or in Fahrenheit terms. And the soldiers were suffering terribly. They didn't have food. They didn't have equipment. They didn't have adequate clothing. And at a certain point, Hitler said to von Paulus, I'm elevating you from general to a field marshal. And the subtext of that was that when you're a field marshal, you have such a high stature in the German military establishment that to surrender would be unthinkable, and that suicide would be the only real option for you. However, von Paulus had another idea, and he did surrender. And when he surrendered, roughly, I think it was like 300, out of a force of well over 1 million German soldiers, I think there were only 300,000 left. 90,000 went into captivity, and 5,000 returned from prison, 10 years later. So it was a absolutely devastating battle for the Germans. It broke their back, and it was the first time that the West itself realized that Germany was not doing well, and there was a good chance that they would lose. And I've talked about this in previous articles, where some of the greatest generals, like Douglas MacArthur, were praising the Soviet Union. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president, was praising the Soviet Union and the people of Stalingrad for their great victory over the Nazi army. And at that time, of course, the United States and England were allied with the Soviet Union. They understood that Germany was out of control. To be honest, many of the U.S. industrialists and even British, there was a lot of sympathy for fascism in the United States and in England, in the United Kingdom. Um, but when the Germans attacked England, England said to Stalin, "Oh, you're my friend now. I'll help you, and please, please protect us from the Germans." So for a while, Churchill was a great friend of Stalin, certainly a friendship of convenience, so to speak, because as soon as the war was over, Churchill turned his back and basically started attacking the Soviet Union. But in any case, so you had the Battle of Stalingrad, very serious battle which the Germans lost. And then later in that year, uh, Hitler felt that he really needed to get a win. So he marshaled all of his resources in this area called Kursk. And Kursk as I say, it's a geographical area back in the Soviet Union days, and it also is a geographical area of the Russian Federation now. The Soviet forces formed what was called a salient. It's like a bulge where many of their forces, a very large amount of Soviet Union's forces, were in this bulge, because the idea was this bulge would be the kind of spear point for an attack deeper into the area occupied by Germany. Excuse me. But so now the significance of this in 2024 was that Ukraine is not winning this war. They know they're not winning it, and so they're thinking, we need to do something to really shake the Russian Federation and its leadership to its core. So we're going to go in there. We're going to capture the area of Kursk. We're going to capture the nuclear power plant in Kursk, and now we will really have some leverage to negotiate with the Russian Federation. The problem is that the Russian Federation, after the initial, failure to prevent this attack, because the Kursk area is not heavily populated. It's not so much it's not as strategic an area as, say, the Donbass, which has a lot of mines and factories and things of that nature, far larger population. The Ukrainians and the British, almost certainly, who put the plan together, had this idea that they were going to capture Kursk and use that as a bargaining chip against the other areas which the Russian Federation already controls, and they wanted to basically the Ukraine wants to get that land back. Well, they failed. So what does that mean in concrete terms? The West and the Ukraine used some of their top troops in order to do this, and now it turns out that apparently, if the numbers are to be believed, something like 68,000 Ukrainian soldiers, and they're probably not all Ukrainian. There's a lot of Western people from Germany or the United States, Poland, France, various countries, some of them pure mercenaries, which means they're just in it purely for the money. Some of them may actually be part of the military, is still acting in a military capacity as for one of these countries. Maybe they've taken their uniforms off, although we have seen videos where there are still insignia, still patches on their uniforms showing what country they're from. So, but it turns out that these forces are now they're defeated. They know they're defeated, and they're either trying to escape or they're basically trapped. So this is, in a way, this is very similar to Stalingrad, because there was this idea of capturing this very strategic part of the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation is in shock against this attack, but then it counterattacks, slowly envelops it, and reaches the point where, just as in Stalingrad, these people are in what we would call a cauldron. They're basically caught by the Russian forces, and as Putin has said recently, these people have a choice. They're either going to surrender or they're going to die. Now, this is where the plot thickens, because Trump portrays himself as a man of peace. He calls himself a man of peace. I question that, because he hired as his Secretary of Defense a warmonger, crazy, far-right Christian nationalist named Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth has Crusade-era cross tattoos on his body, and he talks extensively in a book that he wrote, and I talk about this in another video where I'm citing Ben Norton, who's done a lot of research on this. The guy is basically an extremist and a warmonger, and he wants to wage war against secularism and communism and China and Iran and anybody who's considered a leftist, and who else? And Russia, of course. So this guy is hardly a peacenik, and yet here he is as the Secretary of Defense. Why did Trump choose this guy? If he's such a peacenik. So Trump says he's a peacenik. He doesn't say he's a peacenik. He's a man of peace, and now this force of Ukrainians and Western mercenaries and Western military personnel, they're in this cauldron. So in 1943, Stalingrad, the fascist forces at Stalingrad are encircled by the Soviet army, and as I mentioned, Hitler basically says to the Field Marshal von Paulus, please, now you're the Field Marshal and you're going to keep fighting there, and if you're going to lose, then you have to commit suicide. But that's not what von Paulus did. He basically said, I'm not going to die for you guys, and he basically in captivity he turned against his captors, and in 1946, during the Nuremberg war crimes trial, he was testifying against his former colleagues and bosses. So why do I bring this up? I bring it up because Trump said to Putin, "You're such a great guy. You're a fine person, and I really respect you. And you were so nice to enact the Minsk agreements 1 and 2, and yeah, we did break our agreements with you about NATO not expanding. They're expanding, but you're a good guy. You acquiesced in it, and now we've got these guys, and they're caught in this cauldron. And would you be so kind as to please let them go, and don't treat them badly?" So Putin is saying, look, these guys have committed war crimes, they've committed atrocities, and you won't see these on YouTube because they're just too graphic, but you can see them on Telegram channels, and it's quite horrific, what these people have done. They're absolute murderers and terrorists, basically, which is what Putin calls them. So that's basically what has happened here. And um, and so what Trump did in conjunction with Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, um, they said, well, we really want peace, and let's have a ceasefire, and because we don't want more killing. And Trump is saying, oh, there's been so much killing and death, and those poor people, those young soldiers, and his heart is just so much on his sleeve. But he doesn't talk about the fact that if the Russians expand any further, they're going to get control of all the mineral resources, and he's going to lose control of Ukraine, and all the money that BlackRock invested into buying things for a song, and Bill Gates, who had bought land, and Monsanto had bought land, and they thought they were going to buy Ukraine out. They'd sold Ukraine down the river using Ukrainian men to fight the war for Wall Street. They're all dying. Wall Street gets the land, and who cares about Ukrainian blood? And Putin is saying, you know what? Sorry, not interested. But he wasn't. He wasn't so direct about it. So the Western powers, especially people, basically what this was, in my opinion, was it was like it was like a sales hard sell. So if you've ever been on the consumer side of an insurance salesman or a real estate salesman or a used car salesman, and they say, this is a great deal, you've got to do this. If you don't do it, it's going to be the worst decision you've ever made in your life. You've got to buy this. And Putin is saying, so what they thought they would do is shame Putin into going ahead with this ceasefire. But Putin is too cagey for them, and basically Putin said, great idea. I completely agree with you about the ceasefire. We definitely should have a ceasefire. But there are a few details, there are a few nuances that we need to take care of, such as these guys are terrorists, and you're asking me to release these guys who've been terrorizing and causing atrocities, and we're supposed to show compassion for them. Well, I think we need to kind of think it over before we go ahead with this ceasefire. So that's basically what is happening here. And basically what we're talking about is it's Trump and his mode of interaction with people is bombastic, and it's overbearing. And he thinks like a real estate guy, kind of a real estate, hard-nosed developer, whatever you want to call him, in New York. And he sent his top negotiator, I guess is Steve Witkoff. Now, Steve Witkoff went to Israel, and he demanded of Netanyahu to have a ceasefire. So Netanyahu said to Witkoff, well, it's Saturday, and I'm a good, nice Jewish person, and we don't do work on Saturdays, so you'll just have to wait. And Witkoff says, shut the blankety blank up. We're going to meet. He meets him. You are going to have a ceasefire because Trump wants a ceasefire to prove to the world that he's a man of peace, and he was able to get a ceasefire by the time of his inauguration. So that's what happened with Netanyahu. But he goes to Moscow to ask for a ceasefire of Putin, and Putin kept him waiting for 3 hours. Finally, at the end of the day, it's like Putin is saying, "Oh yeah, you're Steve, you're the buddy of Trump. Okay, well, I'm really busy right now, so just hang out for a while, and I'll see you when I've got time at the end of my workday, okay?" And he goes and he sees Witkoff, and they come up with this idea for a ceasefire. And Putin, of course, says, "Yeah, really great idea, but there's a few details. So you think that we're supposed to enact this ceasefire without further negotiation? If the ball is in our court." And so what I'm saying to you is, well, there are kind of a bunch of details, and these are the details before we enact this. So the ball is in your court to decide how we're going to deal with these problems, because they're not our problems, they are your problems, and we're not going to roll over just because you tell us that we have to be a good guy and do it your way. So that is basically what happened here. And again, the reason why this is so significant is because this is about Kursk. This is about the biggest tank battle in history, where just as in 1943, where the Soviet army crushed the German army and forced them back, here we are in 2025, and the Russian army has crushed the Western armies, the combined Western armies in this area of the Russian Federation, and this is a humiliation for the West, and this is, for a Russian person, this is really, really important, because they were the West has been enacting this replay of the nightmare of World War II, where the Soviet Union lost, upwards of 27 million people. That's just the dead people, not counting the destroyed cities, the crushed lives, the people who lost their limbs, lost their sight, who are in the wheelchair for the rest of their life. People in the West have no idea of what war is really about. It's just a video game for most people. And of course, the United States is very, very blasé about causing wars in other countries that cause enormous amounts of suffering. And so now the Russians are saying, we know what your game is. We're not going to put up with it anymore. And by the way, we have weapons that can go and get your country. So you want to find out what war is really about? You just keep on going and see what happens if you go any further with this. So that is the actual situation, and why this Battle of Kursk is so important, and why it has such an important historical context. So that's what I want to talk about, and you can check out the notes that I have below here, and some of the I have an article that I wrote from my website that talks about what happened in Stalingrad, and also there's a couple of films that talk about Stalingrad and about Kursk. So you can watch those so you have a sense of context, because everything in this war, it's all about historical context. The West would have you think that Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. They don't tell you the history, even though they created the conditions and the history that brought us to this catastrophe for the people of Ukraine. They use these people, and I know Ukrainian people personally, and some of them, some of the younger people, they don't understand what's going on. They've been told these lies about Russia, but I also have a couple of friends who were raised during the Soviet times, and they say, we understand what happened. They dredged up these Nazis from World War II who were collaborating with the Germans during World War II. They survived. Their grandchildren survived, and the United States nurtured these people for 80 years, 70 years, and they're the source of the problem. They have destroyed their own country, not realizing that they were just tools of the West. And that's the tragedy of Ukraine. And people say, what are the security guarantees for Ukraine? What I would say is, when did Ukraine have electric power plants and industries created, and standard of living that was rising, and the population increasing, and so on? It was in Soviet times, when the Ukraine people have allied themselves with their Slavic Russian brothers, who they share a very similar language and they share a similar religion. That was when Ukraine was doing the best. And it's the West who is undermining their security. It's not the Russians. The Russians are working to create security for the Ukrainian people. And unfortunately, they're fighting against these tools of the West who have undermined Ukraine's security. Ukraine has no sovereignty at this point. It's a tool of the West, and the people are suffering because of it. So that's the reality of what Ukraine is all about. And it appears that the West is facing a serious defeat. And it's just in closing, people in the West have been fed a narrative just like the ruthless red-skinned savages, who were populating North America, who had to be genocided so that the Western Europeans and Anglo-American, Anglo-Saxons could take over their land and become rich on the resources of North America. And just like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction and the Vietnamese attacking our ships in the Gulf of Tonkin, and the Mexicans attacked us in 1845, and so we ended up stealing half of Mexico. The U.S. empire has expanded based on wars, based on lies, and this time they're getting caught in a lie. So when the survivors, the mercenaries and the Ukrainians who are captured in Kursk, are forced to testify or die, forced to testify in war crimes trials after this war is finished, they're going to be telling the world who hired them. And who hired them? It was the British, it was the Americans, it was the French, and it was these other bosses who put them up to this. And then all the people in the West who've been told these terrible things about Russia and how bad it is are going to find out that they've been duped, just like the Germans were duped to believe the Nazis in World War II. That's what is going on. So it's going to be a rude wake-up call for the people in the West. And if they get that and they wake up, then they can change the conditions in their countries to make their own societies better so that they're not so exploited by the people who run their societies, have been running it and running it into the ground for the past, 50 years or so. So that's basically what this is about. And I hope you'll appreciate my rant here, but this is the reality of it. And again, if you would like to, contribute to my website through Substack, or you want to buy one of my T-shirts, they're not my personal brand. They're just what I call information T-shirts, which are meant to be conversation starters so that you can engage people in conversation and explain to people what is going on here. Because the only way we're going to get out of this situation that we're in with a deteriorating economy and deteriorating society is for people to understand what the context is. How did this happen and how do we get out of it? So thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.